Ecology Network for this opportunity to speak at this forum. It's been a pleasure to work with you a number of times over the years. I too pay my respects to the Aurora people who have taken care of this part of the country, and to the Wajari people who have done the same for that area of northwestern Australia that were featured in that documentary that we saw a bit of at the beginning of the valley, or maybe even in a suburb not far from here, are trampling on the rights of local people, local landholders, whether they be Aboriginal people or Euro-Australians. Phil might claim that it's all done according to the law, that care is taken to adequately compensate landholders and to restore disrupted environments, and that we must be careful not to naively believe the mass media, which tends to sensationalise stories. I would have loved him to have heard you, Jacinta, actually. He's a scientist too. And so on. Some time ago, was it earlier this year? Anyway, Jackie Raymond, who is here, chaired a meeting of Al Gore climate change presenters in another part of this city. And one of the most impressive speakers on that occasion was a guy called Blair... Sorry? Comley, who was a government advisor to the introduction of the carbon pricing mechanism that's now been brought in Australia. And he said on any given day he could have a meeting with environmentalists in the morning and technocrats or somebody like that in the afternoon. You wouldn't know that they were talking to each other. I wish that we could talk with each other more in this area. So I shall look at economics from a theological perspective, having prepared a selected bibliography with the help of my brother Phil, that I believe will go up on the website later. But I'd like to look at economics from a theological perspective, and at mining as a metaphor for how we in Australia treat the environment in which we live. Now, that program we watched reminded us that Asian economies, China in particular, need resources to fuel their quickly developing economies. Australia has those resources in abundance and is relatively close to them. Further, Australia is a successful and stable trading partner, and all of that kind of stuff that I'm sure you've heard before. I'm well aware of the argument that says the planet can't afford continuous growth, and our growth fetish, to use Clive Hamilton's term, is hastening our demise. And yet, employment is important, and that really strikes at people's heart. That's what seems to keep governments addicted to this growth fetish. To put it like this, it's socially important, I'd rather live in Australia than in Greece right now. So from before the Asian crash to in the late 90s, to after the global financial crash, Australia's managed our economy well. The mining boom has brought us vast riches, and good times are rolling. That is really briefly the case for the affirmative, the secular affirmative. That is to say that we should put our faith in mining, although those whom Bernard Keane and Glenn Dyer call ideological warriors continue to deny that the Labor government manages the economy well. The secular case for what amounts to massive exploitation of resources is actually often bolstered by a religion to justify the exploitation of nature and the oppression of other humans. The particular set of beliefs they engender mitigate against protecting rights of nature and human residents, and against developing the responsibilities that we bear towards them. Sure, every society has an economy. The better that economy is managed, the better it functions, the better that is for the society as a whole and individuals and groups in it. That's important. It's an intuitive statement from an economic layperson. I hope Paul agrees. But sure, every technologically advanced society needs the products of mining. My brother Phil suggests that I invite us all to consider what products around us have steel in them, or how did the vehicle that in which we got here has its steel in it, and so on, and what we would do without these things. I take his point. Unless we decide to live like the indigenous Na'vi on the moon Pandora in the film Avatar, we need the products of mining. Okay. My problem is that we've become too much like the humans of that film, wrecking environment and acting unjustly towards other beings in a single-minded pursuit of the aptly naming unobtainium, and consequently of great wealth. To cut to the chase, greed is the problem. But although it's necessary to name greed, it's not sufficient. That is because we live in a civilization that has for more than 2 centuries developed economic systems that allow and indeed, in many cases, justify greed. We've developed economic, social and ethical theories and even theologies that need to be challenged and exposed as wrong in order to name greed for what it is. They are challenged, make no mistake about that. Every 10th verse in the Christian Bible, my faith tradition, is about money and possessions. That's far too much to do justice to here, but I'll say 2 things at least. Firstly, these verses, massive verses, several, 2,000 or so I think in the Bible, can be summarised, in my view, by epithets: trust in God's provision, and to no one too little, to no one too much, and the place of the human is to work and keep the garden of creation. That's a start of a discussion, I hope. And secondly, for a far more detailed discussion from my particular faith tradition's background, read An Economy of Life, Reimagining Human Progress for a Flourishing World. I've got that on my select biography. But let's go to some bedrock definitions. First, a stock standard definition of economics taken from Wikipedia. Economics seem to find it difficult to differentiate between short and long-term goals. And he reminded readers that the economy-environment conflict ultimately arises from the impossibility of economic markets to place ecologically meaningful values on the functions and attributes of the biophysical world. Now, a number of theologians have noted that Western societies have moved to an understanding of economics that's far too narrow, and they remind their readership that the term economics comes from the Koine Greek word oikonomia, which means the management of the household, administration, itself from oikos, which means house, and nomos, custom or law, and hence the rules of the household. That, I put to you, provides a far broader, more inclusive and I think more helpful basis for understanding economics than the narrow definitions of speaking of production, distribution, consumption, goods and services. Particularly when one notes that the word oikos was also coined by Ernst Haeckel in 1866 with logos. It was joined to logos to form the word economy, or ecology, I'm sorry. Economy, as understood as the management of the house, and ecology, as understood as the study of the house, are in fact joined at the hip. And they are two of a triplet. The third English word that has sprung from the Greek parent oikos is ecumenism, which is derived from oikumene, which means the whole inhabited world. I suggest that if our society returns to these understandings of economics, we will have a far better basis for appropriate use of Earth's resources. That, of course, includes mining activity. In Collapse, How Civilizations Choose to Fail or Succeed, Jared Diamond wrote a chapter called Mining Australia. He uses mining as a metaphor for Australia's environmental history and current predicament. The essence of mining is to exploit resources that do not renew themselves over time. That is what we in Australia do with forests, fish, topsoil and many other aspects of this, the world's most ecologically fragile continent. Diamond has been met with fierce resistance, of course not least from Jennifer Murruhasi, another Australian biologist, but a libertarian who has accused him of keeping on making it up. And yet, as late as this week, a Swiss friend who forewent a prominent business career in Europe to migrate to Australia some years ago bemoaned our Australian tendency to keep on selling off the farm to pay off debt. In Diamond's terms, that equates with economic mining. As Lin Wai, father of eco-theology, pointed out, all living beings do affect their environments. Humans do this more than all other beings, simply to live. But while our social discussion about how to live is framed by an economic theory that defines economics without taking our environmental context and wider human concerns into account, we are opening the way for our innate greed to take over. And greed is not interested in sustainability. Thank you.